But you're thinking, this is not the normal format. Some of you might not have even noticed. So we're going to come to communion at the end of the service. A couple of changes this week. So we're going to cancel Sunday evening church this evening, various different reasons, but we think we're going to take a couple of weeks off to regroup. You know, it's quite tiring and exhausting doing all these things, isn't it? So just need a little bit of downtime, I think. So just let you all know there's no Sunday evening church tonight, and we decided there's no youth this week as well. Youth team's like, yes.
They are getting a bit excited.
We do love it, we promise. But you do need some downtime, don't you? I think if there's anything that is real at Christmas is the fact that we all need to take some downtime, isn't it? Who likes their sport? Yes? Am I a bit loud? I can hear myself bouncing off the back wall. Yes. No, I don't mean am I too loud. I don't mean that. I mean, is my microphone too loud? Okay. So who likes their sport? Yes. So you'll know that there is a difference between team sports and individual sports, isn't there? It's a big difference. You know, with team sports, especially if you're in a tournament, you know, you can have moments of brilliance, but that's not going to win you a tournament. Yet with solo sports, especially contact sport, it's just you and the other person. It's a totally different thing, totally different mindset, totally different thing. And unfortunately, a lot of Christians think that living the Christian life is a solo sport. It's just you and Jesus, and that's all you need to worry about. But unfortunately, that's not the case, is it? Have you gone to sleep already? Is it a bit? Well, we can do it. We know a bit of back and forth, Chris. Absolutely fine. You know, a lot of the spirituality that is being sold to people in the 21st century is a personal thing, isn't it? You know, this finding this inner peace, this enlightenment. It's this personal thing. But Christianity is more than that. It is that, but it is more than that. It's so much more than that. That when Jesus tells his disciples that he's going to die for the second time, so it's 3 times in Matthew's gospel do we have Jesus declaring that he's going down to Jerusalem. So it's about 2.5 years in. So they're going down to Jerusalem. And Jesus knows, and he's telling them he's going there with the intention to die. Now, we might not come across like that, but that's exactly what's happening. And you'll find that it's in Matthew 17. Jesus predicts his death a second time. This is not my main text this morning, but I'll quickly read it to you. When they came together in Galilee, he said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised to life." And the disciples were filled with grief. Each time Jesus declares it, there is a reaction, isn't there? Because obviously this is their reality. They're on the road with this man. They're on tour, aren't they? For 2.5 years. It's not a very pleasant tour, but they're on the road for 2.5 years. They've left their life behind, but everything on hold, and they have chosen to follow Jesus. And now Jesus is telling them ahead of time that he's about to die, and that's bound to bring up all sorts of questions in their minds, and it would in our mind as well, wouldn't it? Think about it. So 3 times he predicts his death, and 3 times there is a reaction. If you fully committed your life to something, and then someone at some point says, actually, it's not quite what you think is going to happen, this is now going to happen, you're going to want to know, well, what does the future hold for me? That's a fair question, isn't it? What does the future hold for me? And you see, this is where we come. We come into Matthew chapter 18, and they're starting to, is kind of percolating through their mind as, okay, they may be filled with grief, but what's next? They can't picture what is the next 6 months, but what is next? If Jesus is going to die, what is next? And they come up with this question. If you turn in your Bibles, it's Matthew chapter 18. Let me read this. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a little child to him and placed the child among them and said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. If anyone causes any one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. Such things must come. But woe to the person through whom they come. If your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into the eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. Clearly, Jesus is not talking literally. Just for clarity there. Okay? It is better for you to enter with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell. See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. What do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go to look for the one that has wandered off? And if he finds it, truly I tell you that he is happier about the 1 sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, our Father in heaven is not willing that any of these ones should perish. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the 2 of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take 1 or 2 others along so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen, even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed on heaven. Again, truly I tell you, that if 2 of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 gathered in my name, there am I with them. Amen. There's a reason why I read so much this morning, because that is Jesus' response to their question. So who is it that said, "I am the greatest"? Muhammad Ali. It's a famous quote, isn't it? I am the greatest. He was 21 years of age. It's incredible, isn't it? I am the greatest. So the disciples come, they realize that things are changing, that they're going into this time where Jesus is saying, I'm going to believe in you. So they come and ask this question. This is their response. You remember the response that Peter made after Jesus' first declaration that he was going to die? Can you remember what he did? No, that's not going to happen, Lord. And then Jesus rebukes him. Now, the disciples come to Jesus and they ask this question: who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And you might think that that is a strange question, but it's actually not a strange question. It is a logical question. What they're actually asking, who's going to be in charge when you're gone? That is the point. That is what they're trying to get at here. And maybe they're putting it over in a bad way, but they're coming to Jesus and saying, so if you're leaving us, who then has reached the level that they're going to be able to replace you and become the master? Do you understand? So it's not the wrong question. Maybe their approach is kind of off. And you see, in most other environments, this is totally normal. You know, even in the Old Testament, you remember Moses was replaced by Joshua, wasn't he? Elijah was replaced by Elisha. So the student becomes the master. Do you understand? So this is a logical progression. There are 12 students. Which one of us is going to become the master? That's what they're asking. Do you understand? Who of us is going to lead this rabble once you're gone? Now, Jesus has already declared who is going to lead, hasn't he? He's already declared this great promise over Peter, isn't he? He's already done that. When Jesus declares who Jesus is, Jesus declares that on this rock I will build my church. And I know that there's lots of elements to that, but he's specifically talking about a special part that Peter will play in the kingdom and the establishment of the kingdom of heaven. So it's not as unusual a question as you might think, is it? We kind of come into terms with the fact that you're not going to be with us, but who is going to take us forward? Who are we going to follow? If you're no longer here, who are we going to follow? Who's going to be the master? Do you notice who is not speaking up here for a change? Do you notice? Did you pick up on that? It's like Peter's keeping really quiet, isn't he? Yeah? He's like, oh, fell into this trap before. No, you go and ask him. You go and ask him. Last time I got a row. Peter maybe finally is learning some lessons. Yeah, maybe he's finally learning some lessons. Send someone else to ask the question. No, I don't mean that. Maybe speaking out is not always the right approach, especially when you haven't really thought it through. So what does Jesus do? So they asked the question, and Jesus, now he could have rebuked them again and said, why are you thinking that? Why are you questioning who's going to be in charge? But he doesn't. Jesus uses this as an opportunity for a wonderful lesson for the disciples. And this is where it goes from individual Christian walk into the church. You'll notice, if you were listening or you were following along, this is the first time we hear Jesus talk about the word church, the ecclesia, the church. Did you pick up on that? The word church was in this the verse here. Is it 17? Yeah, verse 17. The church. It's not talking about this church. It's talking about the church. The group of believers worldwide that follow Jesus. The church. So Jesus brings a child. And he says, well, you need to be like this child. Anyone who wants to enter the kingdom has to change and become like a little child. Now, what's the first instinct for you when you think of, when he's talking about a child, what would your first instinct be? Because my first instinct was innocence. What, innocent? Like a child? No. Children are not innocent. You do realize that. You don't teach your child to be naughty, do you? They're not innocent. They're sinful, just the same as us as adults are sinful. It is our nature. They're not innocent. Now, obviously, there's certain things that, as you go through life, there's certain types of innocence that you can't ever regain. And we know that as children, there is an element, but that's not what Jesus is talking about. But even before that, Jesus says something quite revealing, and he says you have to change. What is he referring to? He's talking about being born again. He's referring back to what he spoke to Nicodemus about. You must be born again to enter the kingdom of heaven. You have to give up on your old life, and you have to follow me. Being born again. Changing our outlook on life. Changing our loyalties. What do you mean? Who are you loyal to? When the chips are down, who are you loyal to? Usually it's us, ourselves. Every man for himself. You heard of that? Yeah? When the chips are down, every man for himself. Jesus says, no. No, that's not how we live as believers. There has to be a change. And rather than living for ourselves, we start living for God. His priorities become our priorities. So if it's not innocence, what is Jesus talking about? Who do you depend on? Think about it. Is it your boss? Is it your wife, your husband, your parents, your children? A child is dependent on its mother and father. That's what a child is, isn't it? They're dependents. You know, when you fill out your census form as how many dependents do you have? That's what it's talking about. How many people in your house are dependent on you? So when Jesus brings a child, he says, this child is completely dependent on his parent. Completely dependent. And Jesus is saying, just like this child, once you go through this process of change, once you go through this process of being born again, you need to be fully dependent on the Father. Fully dependent on the Father, giving up all of your skills and abilities, they're fine. But who are you reliant on? I struggle with this, if I'm honest, because I'm quite a self-reliant sort of person, and maybe you are as well. I find that concept quite difficult. Do you? Let's be honest. It's just how my brain is wired. You know, I like solving problems, and I just think most things I can solve problems. But there comes a point where you can't. There comes a point in our lives, and no matter what it is, no matter what circumstance you're going through, there's certain things you meet in life and you just can't fix it. You can't get yourself from this place to that place. This is why Jesus says you have to become dependent on the Father, on the one who can change your circumstance, who can get you through this Christmas period. Because for some people, Christmas is not a happy time. It's a time you have to endure. And you just hope for the best and try and get through it. That's what it's like for some people. And I think there's a growing number of people within churches that are becoming discontent with this concept of Christmas. I just talked about it earlier. It's like a bitter taste, isn't it? It's a bittersweet taste. We love spending time with our families, but the rest of it is just noise. And the noise is not even a nice noise. It's fake. It's exactly what it is. It is fake. It's not real. Be happy. I don't want to be happy. But when we're dependent on the Father, when we give up on the life that we've been living, and we recognize our life is not, we're not perfect. We can't solve every problem, but He can. And even if He can't deliver us from, maybe you've got a sickness, or maybe you've got something that you're really struggling with. Jesus will get you through, and He will deliver you even beyond death. Even beyond death, safely to the other side. Doesn't promise us an easy life. Did Jesus live an easy life? He lived a life of poverty. How many kings do you know that weren't born in a palace? This is the King of Kings. The king above every king. Born into poverty. Do you think he doesn't know what poverty feels like? For those that are struggling this Christmas and just saying, how on earth am I going to make it work? Do you think Jesus doesn't know? But Jesus is trying to stretch their thinking. So first of all, he's saying you need to be changed. You need to be born again. That is the first requirement for the kingdom of heaven. But you have to be humble, like this child. Humble, reliant on the Father. And I think that is something we have lost in the Western world, to be reliant on God. You see some places where there is real poverty. And maybe you visited different places. You went to Uganda with Roger and Rebecca, and it's an eye-opening experience to see real poverty. And there's even different levels of poverty when you go to different countries, isn't there? They're reliant, I can tell you, on the Father. Their level of faith is so much greater than anything you could ever imagine, because they're reliant on the Father. This is what Jesus is saying. You need to be reliant on the Father. The way you live your Christian life. So Jesus is going from personal, spiritual experience into group thinking. Even offering up this idea of the church. And then the rest of the chapter, apart from saying what is requirement for leadership, humility, dependence on God, he then spends the rest of the chapter talking about what the church should look like. And you might not pick that up, because the headings don't say that, but this is what Jesus is effectively saying as we live in community together, because this is what is required of us, to live in community. You see, spirituality is, you can read your Bible and you can pray at home and you can keep your personal spirituality tip-top. But it's never challenged until you have to mix with other Christians, is it? Let's be honest. Yeah, church can be tough, can't it? And why is that? Because we all have our different agendas and we're all pulling in different directions and we all have different ideas of what songs we should be singing, what pastors should be preaching, what ministries should be operating. Should church start at 10:30, 11 o'clock, or 11:30 for some of you? So all of these things, we're pulled in different directions. But we are required to be in community. Required. It's not optional. We are required to be in community. Do you know why it's so important? It's because then we are really tested. It's all very well having your spirituality, all those nice feelings that you get when you spend time with the Lord. But it's when you spend time with each other when the rubber hits the road, isn't it? Is it real? Am I being real? Come on. So there are expectations to how we live in community. Jesus even coming up with this idea of the church. Jesus warns against causing others to stumble. We have to be careful how we live our lives. Jesus talks about these little ones, each little one that is dependent on God. Don't cause one of them to stumble. How you live matters. And if you don't care about your soul, you should be thinking about others. Those that may not be as strong spiritually as you. You know, Paul builds a whole structure around all of this, doesn't he? The Apostle Paul, he goes into so much more detail as he writes his letters to the churches later. What about the sheep that have wandered off? Jesus talks about leaving the 99 and go in and bring in those that have wandered. There are plenty that have wandered. If you think about those that, You think over the years, people that you've seen in church, and they wander off, don't they? These sheep, they just wander off. Stupid beings, aren't they? Sheep. It's a good example. They just wander off. They leave the path. This is the path that we're on, this path of salvation. We walk along what's called the way. But sometimes we wander off because we're stupid sheep. All of us, like sheep, have gone astray. And we need others to say, come on, come back. And we know it's Jesus, it's the Spirit of Jesus that causes us to come back, isn't it? But we need all of us to encourage people. Come back. Come back. I'm not talking about come back to church. That's important. Come back to faith. Come back to truly believing who Jesus is. And being dependent again on him. But then Jesus goes to the part that really, the hardest thing in the church is dealing with disagreements. Anyone here ever had a disagreement with somebody in church? Come on. Really? Well, 4 or 5 people, yeah, come on. It's natural, we're human, aren't we? It's natural. Now, Jesus talks about it in the context of sin here, but you can widen this and say, maybe it's just a general disagreement. There is a general principle here which we have to get our heads around if we are to live in community with one another. Because guess what? You're going to disagree with somebody at some point. If you haven't already, it's coming. Because we're human. We disagree. We don't agree with the best way of doing things and all sorts of things. So what does Jesus say? And this is really interesting. And I just want to encourage you in this, because this is probably one of the hardest things as Christians we have to do. I'll be honest with you. You think prayer's hard? Let's deal with this. So what you should do, whenever you have a problem with somebody, you should go and talk to everybody else, have a good gossip about it, and then just forget about it. Is that the right way to do it? No, of course it's not. In fact, that is the opposite of what you should do. So Jesus says, if you have a problem with somebody, you've got to put your big boy pants on and go and talk to them. Don't mess with them. It's hard, isn't it? Yeah? You've got to go and talk to them. What's that? No, don't ask the pastor. See, he doesn't say that, does he? Doesn't say, oh, just refer to the pastor, he'll sort it out. No. If we are to live in community, when we have a problem with, look, you've got 2 choices. I love this. I love simplicity. You have 2 choices. Get over yourself or go and talk to the person about it. That's it. That's your 2 options, right? Get over yourself or go and have a chat. And we have got to learn, as a church, as a people, that this is how you deal with issues. And to be honest with you, it's not easy, because I've done that, and sometimes it doesn't go well. Sometimes people leave the church when you actually have a personal a disagreement, and just you go and have that conversation, and like, oh, and they have a flounce. Yeah? They have a flounce. That's it, I'm off. Just long as it was you that have the problem with that person, then it's a one-to-one, then you've done it right. You can't control people's reaction, can you? But we can be obedient in the way that we do that. The second thing is, if that doesn't go well, it says, take someone else with you the next time. Take Richard, he frightened anybody. Is he asleep? He's still awake, Reg. Just volunteering your services, so. Take someone with you. And only then do you come and tell me. Do you understand? It's really important. Jesus lays out for us how we deal with conflict. And do you know what? It's really uncomfortable. But that's how it's meant to be. And that way, you don't include anybody else. So I don't get to hear about all your dramas. Because you solved it all for yourself. It's great. Make my job real easy. I'm joking. You know I'm joking. Kind of. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a church that kind of managed to do that? You know, I just think, as a church, as we come to the end of this year, has it been a strange year? Was it only last week that Syria had a president? Is it just this week that this has happened? This is how quickly things are changing worldwide at the moment, and it is astonishing what is going on. You know, the Americans have funded it. They even admitted to it. It's just mind-boggling. It's like, what are you doing? What on earth are you doing? And the great empire of America is probably coming to an end. What's next? Jesus is calling us all into a deeper relationship with him. It's not about who's the greatest, who's the fastest, who's the strongest, who's the most intelligent, who's the humblest, who's the one willing to go and have that awkward conversation first. Because that's humility, isn't it? Being willing for somebody to say, I don't like what you just said, and I'm going to take even more offense. That's the choice we have. Living in relationship with one another. That is what we are called to do. And there is a word for it. It's called love, isn't it? What did Jesus say? He summarized the 2 commandments. Love God with all your heart, mind and soul. And love each other as you love yourselves. Amen. We'll leave it there this morning. So we're going to come to the communion table now. And it is good for us to remember these things, that we are here in community, and life can be challenging. Life can be challenging, can't it? But we should be helping each other, uplifting each other. And when there's disagreement, just deal with it. Just deal with it. And I know it's hard, but that's what we're called to do.